everyone, and welcome back to Innovation Unplugged, the show where we dig into the minds behind the technologies transforming enterprises and industries. I'm Jim Brismitzis, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by a dear friend of mine, Darren Kimura, who today is the CEO of AI Squared, a company that's on a mission to operationalize AI by making it easy to integrate into existing applications and workflows. AI Squared is not just about building models, it's really about making these models usable, actionable, and impactful across the entire enterprise. So if you're struggling to get some value out of your AI projects, this is the conversation you won't want to miss. Darren, welcome to our show today, and we appreciate you spending time with us.
Jim, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Darren, with every one of our Unplugged series, we always like to start with what was the founding vision behind AI Squared? And the subject matter for AI is so broad. I'm really curious to get your perspective of that, and then we'll move into the enterprise opportunity from there.
Okay, so AI Squared is a dual-use technology company, but in the beginning, it was primarily government focused. So everything we did in the beginning was Department of Defense focused. And the origins of the company actually started around the time of WikiLeaks. So the team that built AI Squared came from the NSA. And what they were doing way back then was working on trying to figure out the types of documents that were taken by Edward Snowden and were being prepared to be put on WikiLeaks and summarize them. And there were 20,000 documents. So as a result of that, they needed to create an LLM that would summarize, what was suspected to have been taken, put it into a report, and then move that report around government to key stakeholders, including the president, in a secure way. And none of the technologies are really there to allow that to happen back then. So that became a platform, and that platform is what became AI Squared. It was initially a method to connect data sources together, run AI models, have security and governance inside of that workflow, produce outputs, review the outputs, and then share those outputs with the people you want to share them with. And that technology is ultimately what was lifted and shifted and recreated to become the AI Squared of today.
Fantastic. We had the privilege of hosting Ian Swanson, who is the founder of Protect AI, in one of our roundtables for a current batch. And there was a conversation we had with him around how enterprises have been in AI for a while. In the past, they called it machine learning. Now AI is bringing the intelligence to what machines have learned. I'm curious to see what patterns of adoption are you seeing in the enterprise today around AI? Because clearly there are investments, and clearly CIOs and business leaders are looking at how can this be a useful tool for, let's say, delivery of better customer service, rapid product production, but whatever the case. I'm curious to get your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is exactly what AI Squared is positioned to solve today. So the big problem that we see was highlighted in a recent MIT report that said 95% of all POCs, AI POCs in enterprises, never ever make it to production. That means only 5% of these actually make it into production. And they cited a number of reasons for that. One was a lot of tools, right? You have to have different technologies, which today are very point source technologies, but you have to combine them together to get the workflow end to end, meaning from the source, the source of where those documents lie, through the models to the user who's going to be at the end of it. That could be anywhere from like 10, 12, 15 different technologies, which have different UIs, different methods of coding, different workflows, different APIs that you have to string together. So that's tough, right, to do. And you could probably, as a large enterprise, you could probably get a data science team and some data engineers together to make it work. And it'll work for one or two of those what we call pipelines. The problem there is what happens over time when things change, when APIs change, when SDKs change, when applications change. Those pipelines go down. And then as a result of that, the insights are no longer available. And as a result of that, you lose trust. Your end users like, wow, this thing doesn't even work. Why do we invest in it? Why do we even bother? So as a result of that, keeping those pipelines up are also very critical, and that happens over time, all the time. So these are the types of things that AI Squared set out to accomplish is one, ensuring that we have a easy way to connect all those different technologies in one simple platform, one UI. Um, do it in a way that you didn't have to have a lot of coding or frankly, no coding. Drag and drop is better because as we get into the more commercialized future of AI, you're going to have less highly technical people trying to put together these workflows, these pipelines. So making it easy from the start was really important for us to do. And then having the ability for humans to check in at different points of the insight generation, ensuring, for example, that the insights are not impacted in a way where it could happen like what recently happened to Grok. Well, if you recall, a couple of months ago, Grok was being hacked by end users, and in a way that was very trivial. Like they just kept asking questions, and as a result of those questions, it led Grok to kind of go off its rails and really become a little bit hateful. And that can definitely happen in AI, but it cannot happen in a large enterprise, and it should never happen in the federal government. And that's exactly the kinds of guardrails that we have to make sure we put into these deployments as we go forward. When you bring all of that together, that's what will allow those insights to be more readily accessible, easy to deploy, increase the percentage, from 5% to maybe 50% in the next year or two. And that's what we want to help accomplish.
And of the many differentiations of your platform with AI Squared, I guess the one that really sticks out for me, Darren, is unlike traditional LLMs, and there's plenty of them today in the marketplace, what you're doing is you're bringing intelligence capabilities inside existing applications that an enterprise has already built, which means you're not forcing a refactor of any of these applications. You're now bringing the AI capabilities. Is that a fair statement to say based on your mission?
That's our philosophy. That's exactly right. So our vision is that your users, if you think about the people who actually interact or will want to interact with the AI insights, those are the end users. That could be a salesperson, that could be an analyst, any number of different individuals working in your company or for your agency. Those users are already familiar with tools. Maybe those tools are things that are like Salesforce, for example, or Microsoft Dynamics, or even dashboards like Tableau, Looker, etc. So our philosophy is don't change that user behavior because it's programmed in them. They know how to use it. They're comfortable with it. Great. Why don't we bring the insights to them as opposed to having them retrain everything else? It helps them to be more comfortable adopting an already foreign and potentially threatening new technology. So we make it as easy as we can by embedding those insights in applications you already have.
And that's what makes the use of the not just the applications, but that enterprise data even more useful, right, Darren? And I think that's a key differentiation I wanted listeners to understand today. So let's shift into this started off as sort of a refute to Edward Snowden and some of the history there. It's now becoming much more of an enterprise value play because you're certainly seeing some traction in the marketplace. Without naming any names, because I don't want to break any confidentiality, it would be great if you could take our listeners through like a typical enterprise engagement. What does that look like, or even reference a client and some of the the outcomes, the value that they've seen from deploying AI Squared.
Yeah. So we tend to work with large organizations. The platform itself was designed to serve the DoD, the biggest the biggest enterprise. If you think about it, conflicts there is in the world. So we tend to be very appropriate for large, Fortune 10 financial institutions, insurance companies, CPG companies. These are examples of existing customers that we have. But what we do is we will initially come in as a component of infrastructure. So we're going to come in, we're going to connect up to all the sources of data. Back to your earlier comment, where if you're in Salesforce, you have access to Salesforce only data. In the world of AI Squared, we connect to all your data. So it could be Snowflake and Databricks, SQL databases. It could be SaaS applications, a licensor, a CRM, any system of record you might have. We connect to it all. And we pull the right amount of information back, run that information to the model, and then use the insights and deliver those insights to the end user again in the application. So in the case of the way we typically get started is we'll typically go in as infrastructure, we'll connect to all the sources of data. Most of these large enterprises will have a large foundation model that they like. and that's great. But in many cases, those are on-prem, so they're not your traditional, OpenAI, ChatGPT 5 or whatever the current version is when you watch this video might be. It's going to be something else because they're working on their own curated data. They're not connecting it, for example, to the broader internet. Then what we tend to do is we run small language models from there. These models are typically fine-tuned for particular use cases. So it could be something to the extent of like procurement. Maybe the procurement team is looking at writing an RFP and evaluating vendors and selecting a vendor and sending them notifications. You can do all of that with a small language model. So you run the query through the large language model. It produces a high level of result. Then you run that through the small language model, and it can actually go out there and find vendors within your parameter, create a specification for you to review and approve, agentically send that information out to the procurement response teams on the vendor side, receive their reactions, compare them, create a table, score them, grade them, make a recommendation, even generate notice of award letters, and then work with you as you're negotiating the contract as a real-time co-pilot, if you will, as you're like negotiating prices or payment terms or whatever the case may be. Yeah. So that small language model and the tools that we bring will help you to do that as you go from kind of top to bottom of the workflow, as one example. Right. There's many others. There's dynamic rerouting of trucks as they're delivering goods to different locations throughout the course of a day. There could be things like policy reviews. For example, if you want to make sure an email that you're sending out to your team complies with HIPAA guidelines or perhaps your own internal SOPs before you send that out. You can have that reviewed within the platform as well. Those are some very high-level examples. Happy to dive even deeper as you like.
Yeah, let's actually dive into this. This is all fantastic. Let's dive into, and the caveat here, Darren, is every enterprise is different. Their data strategy is very different, so it's not a one-size-fits-all. But because of the focus areas that you have, I think your deployment, your time to value is shorter. That's my sense of it. I'd love to get you to kind of weigh in on what is the average deployment experience like. Are we talking months of re-engineering stuff? Are we talking, from concept to pilot to like it's actually in production within weeks? I'd love to have you share that journey.
Sure. So we have two products. One product is called Unify, which is our unified platform. It brings all of our technologies together in a very hardy enterprise class, Department of Defense level cybersecurity platform. And then we have our mid-market product, which is called Sparks, which is more of a conversational AI technology. I'm going to talk a little bit about Unify here, because that's what your large enterprises are going to typically want. Now, taking any technology into production for a large enterprise, particularly like a really large regulated enterprise, will take a long time no matter what that technology is. It could be Salesforce, it could be AI Squared, it doesn't really matter. It probably will take you to go from the initial first meeting to production. It'll probably take you about a year in a large enterprise to deploy any technology. But the advantage of deploying an AI Squared is that once we're in production, every new model, every new use case you bring in gets shorter after that. So, for example, the very first use case might take, once you deploy the platform in, that's about a year. The very first use case might take 6 months to validate and actually feed those insights to an end user. Believe it or not, some of these large organizations, let's say you're putting a chatbot on a web page, there's a web page owner, a different web page owner for each of those pages, and that individual is responsible to make sure that it's cyber secure, they know where the sources are, they know what it's going to do, so they will get into the details that startups probably can't even envision without having had gone through this process. So that takes longer the first time. But then every time after that, it gets shorter and shorter and shorter. So in the case of AI Squared, as you're beginning to deploy new models or new use cases, maybe by use case 3, you're looking at 3 months to deploy. Yep. And it just continues to get shorter and shorter and shorter after that because the trust is already established there.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's switch up gears a little bit. There was... let's go back in time, my friend. In the early 2000s, there was a lot of money being invested in startups generally, right? The whole web scale startup started to really pop up. And then the bubble burst sometime in 01, 02. And truth be told, in hindsight, the market for startups never evaporated. It was just the hype cycle around ideas that were really never going to be scale ideas sort of died off. But what emerged from that are, the common big enterprises we see today, the Amazons, the Facebooks, and similar. AI is going through a similar hype cycle. There's lots of talk. In fact, I read this morning again that the hype cycle for AI is going to burst at some point. That doesn't mean that AI is not useful. It's just that there's a lot of hype in the market today. And the signal to noise ratio is really off. At some point, there will be a correction, and enterprises will start to see sort of the clarity from the fog kind of thing. My sense of things is that AI is going to be an area that enterprises will invest in. We're already seeing some of those investments play out. But if you were to cut through the noise that's happening in the market today, where do you anticipate those investments to really land? Because AI is not a sort of a here tomorrow thing. It is very much a journey, just like enterprise ERP apps was a journey, just like the cloud was a journey. It's going to be a journey. So I'm curious to get your perspective on where you think that journey is going to lead for AI.
Sure. I'll provide some thoughts actually kind of from the beginning of that. And I might forget the question as we go through it because as I'm putting it together, I'm trying to think it through. But so I guess the difference that I see between the 2000 bubble burst of the internet and what we're seeing here at AI, maybe two things that come to my mind first off. One is that I think AI is more fundamentally massive than maybe what, the dot-com bubble was. AI to me is very equivalent to something like roads back when we were riding horses, and it moved into having vehicles on the roads or even electricity. It's that foundational. Right. So it's significantly bigger. And as a result of that, I think that the time to whatever it is, maturity is going to be much, much longer, and the total addressable market is going to be more significant. I think the other thing is that AI today is directly generating revenue, where in the dot-com bubble period, it was eyeballs. Remember that? We were always talking about eyeballs, how many eyeballs can get on the website, because we thought that was a measure of success.
Right.
Whereas in the case of AI, you're actually bringing real benefit. You can actually measure payback in terms of months and even in short years now, because there are savings to be had. There is, 24/7 operation. There's a reduction in human error. There's a lot of benefits, real tangible benefits that you have, in addition to those that will come. The imagination. A part of that 95% of POCs that never make it into production are because those are great imaginary use cases, and all of it can be done by AI, but maybe they don't have an ROI yet, so put them on the back burner for now. So you have a lot of that. So I think that the characteristics of this time are a little bit different. So that's the first part of it. Where I see AI being highly relevant, and rubber meets the road, if you will, is that you're going to have AI displacing SaaS applications. These SaaS applications, by the way, are system of record applications that are already in the market. They're already multi-billion-dollar type companies, and there's many, many of them. I'll give you some examples, right? CRM. You already see how AI is directly displacing CRM. And an example of which is Salesforce, right? Back when Salesforce was created, one of the novelties, one of the things that made them truly valuable and unique was their ability to create a database in the cloud. And back then, it was really, really hard to do that. Today, you can vibe code that in minutes and spin something up on AWS in a way that you could never have imagined back then, right? So you are now seeing companies building their own LLMs around CRM with their own data sources like Databricks, for example, and moving away from cloud-based SaaS applications like Salesforce. Now, why does this relate to AI? It's because you're not creating new revenue there. You're just shifting the revenue from something that is legacy into something that's more modern and has more universal application. Because that horizontal AI infrastructure is not only doing CRM, it can also do ERP. It can also do HRIS. It can be agentic and actually go in and replace what human workers might be doing analysis-wise, clicking radio buttons to book flights, all these kinds of things that can already be done. Those are real dollar shifts as opposed to new dollar creates. So I think that's also very different about what we're seeing today.
You're spot on, my friend. You took me down memory lane. I don't know if I ever told you, but I had a 5-year stint at PeopleSoft and Oracle, and Oracle acquired PeopleSoft. And back in the day, so this was when PeopleSoft had moved from client server to the web, right?
Yeah.
PeopleSoft's what was it? The 2000 release was the first sort of release on the web. But all we had done there is we had shifted the client server relationship to being a completely web relationship, and that sort of led way, honestly, to what is modern day SaaS today. So that's all great. But the struggle that many enterprises had is they had these repositories of databases that serve different functions, whether it was on the supply chain side or the CRM side or the HR side. And they weren't really connecting a lot of that context together. So if I'm doing an order to cash process, I'm staying inside of CRM. There might be a play in the financial services piece. But when it comes to support and it came to marketing and such, they weren't connecting those databases. And I think to your point, if I can put these words in your mouth, I think what AI is doing is not just automating some of that, but it's actually bringing real context so that when anyone is interacting with customer data, whether it's on the supply side, CRM side, or otherwise, they have more of a 360-degree view of the entire business process. And that in itself could be the disruption, right?
It absolutely is. I mean, having that data, breaking the data silos down and having that data available for analysis across disciplines, that's so valuable. You can make better decisions than you ever could before. You see the data in different ways you can never do before. And that is what's leading rise to some of these new innovations, right? I think that, not only will SaaS applications, system of record SaaS applications begin to be impacted. I don't want to say they're going to go away because I think some of them are big enough to be able to make the adjustments, but they're struggling.
Totally.
I mean, SAP is a good example of that where, PeopleSoft, right? Where, they've been struggling to bring AI in. They'll figure it out. They'll acquire companies, they're leaning heavily into it. But other companies may not be as fortunate and may not survive because you're going to have more utility out of what becomes the next version of that that platform, if you will, that SaaS-like platform. I think they're going to be horizontal data platforms with AI at the core.
You bet. Well, let's end here, my friend, and with the last question of what practical advice would you give enterprise leaders who are assessing and road mapping their AI investments and strategies? What practical advice would you leave them with?
I think that the first thing you want to do is you want to figure out the use case that has the highest ROI. Because the goal, and what we've seen consistently with the corporations we work with, and it's a lot of them, is that you have to make sure that first deployment is successful. Yep. Because if it's not successful, you're probably going to be out of a job. You're going to lose a lot of the support dollars, et cetera, for future initiatives. So that first one needs to be the one, right? So, spend the time, find the ROI, make sure there's logical paybacks, and evaluate technologies that can help you get there in a way that will get you there today, but also in the future. Because what we're seeing is that you can buy technologies, point source technologies today off the shelf and string them together, kind of what I mentioned a few minutes ago.
Yep.
And that will work temporarily, but it will not deliver the value long term. I'll give you one example before we break. We had a customer who had developed their own internal pipeline, and it went down. And as a result of that, they came to us because they realized that something had happened. What had happened was that, imagine that you have an AI insight and a data pipeline behind it. The results went down. They couldn't figure out what happened. So they had to go find the original data scientist who actually architected it. That guy had to go find the data engineer who actually built it, because they couldn't remember, right? These enterprises are working so many projects in parallel that they forget. They finally found the right team, and then they went back and troubleshot the entire process. It took them about a day or two to figure out what happened. What actually happened was an API had changed, something basic as that. And as a result, they had lost the pipeline, lost the insight, and lost the support from the internal team. You want to avoid that. So you want to think longer term, make sure that you buy technologies or you select technologies that can help you make sure that pipeline is up so you can deliver those insights with confidence for the long term.
Awesome. Darren, thank you so much for offering your time today, my friend. Certainly, I'm a lot smarter in the AI realm thanks to today's discussion, so I really appreciate it. Look, if you're building AI, buying AI, or simply just trying to bridge the gap between data science and business impact, AI Squared is clearly an approach you need to watch. Darren, thank you again for sharing your visions, your insights, and your practical perspectives on enterprise AI and the journey as such. We really appreciate it. For our listeners, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with anyone working in the AI adoption space at scale within the enterprise. Until next time, keep innovating and stay unplugged. Thanks again, Darren.
Thank you.